I used to like to go exploring in the woods. Not anymore. My name is Jake Somerville. My mom and dad both have advanced degrees in agricultural science, whatever that means. They would survey land, crops, sometimes even the local wildlife. I wasn't sure what exactly it was they did, but I knew it was why we moved around a lot. I didn't mind though. After all, I like exploring. Sometimes pretending I was Indiana Jones searching for some lost ancient civilization. Sure, I've had my fair share of close calls, but nothing serious ever happened to me. At least, not until we moved into a small town in Missouri. I don't remember the name of it due to the mental trauma I experienced, or so my psychiatrist says. But I do remember Zach Mays. Zach was 9 years old that summer, the same age as me. He was into a lot of the same things I was, especially exploring. I met him when my parents moved into this farmhouse. It wasn't big or fancy or neat like the usual houses we rented, but it had a sort of rustic charm to it. Zach's parents owned the land the house was on, and the property next door where they lived. They were friendly enough, even offering to help my parents get settled in. As they were handing the house keys to my parents, Zach came around the corner, held out his hand, and announced who he was. I was never the one to make friends. What with the constant moving around and whatnot, something about Zach just clicked. We had moved at the start of summer break, so Zach and I had plenty of time to play. We'd mostly go exploring, capturing small animals, and releasing them back into the wild. We had all 4 acres to ourselves, except for this area near the edge of the property line. That was the start of the woods. Naturally, both of our parents forbade us from going in there, but we did anyways. We'd clear our own trail pretending we were in a lush jungle. One time, Zach swore he saw a copperhead, but we never did find it. At first, we'd stay relatively close to the edge, but as time went on, we became more relaxed. Before long, we were trekking deep into the woods, able to find our way back with markers. We'd give names to it. One day, at the edge of the property line, we came across a patch of woods that were different somehow. Darker. Thorn bushes were common in the woods, but this place was completely covered in them. In fact, it was so thick we couldn't hope to gain entry. We walked around it for what seemed like hours, but never did find a way past those thorns. As time passed, we forgot about that place in the woods. After all, there wasn't so much left to explore. To my delight, my parents told me that we were going to be here for a while. Something to do with anomalies in the surrounding forest. Zach and I ended up being in the same class. Before we knew it, we were fast approaching Halloween. The forest, which was once green and beautiful, so full of life, had transitioned to a graveyard of falling leaves and claws reaching despairingly into the sky. It was like they were begging to the sky to return the leaves to them. On October the 13th, Zach was staying over at my place for the night. It was just the two of us in the middle of nowhere. Our parents had gone to some boring adult party where kids weren't allowed. We were just sitting on the floor in front of the TV watching horror movies when out of nowhere, Zach elbowed me on the side, scowling. I asked him what was the big deal was. and his face lit up. "Do you remember that thorny part of the forest?" he asked. "Yeah," I replied. "Why?" "Let's go in there. Everything's dried up. We can cut through the thorns easily now." I was hesitant first. Something about that idea seemed off, seemed wrong. But I didn't want Zach to think I was chicken. So, reluctantly, I agreed. We grabbed our backpacks, stuffing them with supplies for our adventure. Zach placed a pair of green garden shears and a spare flashlight in his, while I grabbed a map of the area, some batteries, and an extra flashlight for mine. We then grabbed our jackets and a pair of flashlights, then headed out of the door towards the forest. The moon was blood red and full that night, bathing everything in that eerie hue. It was almost as if the very earth itself were stained with blood. It had been a while since either of us had been in the woods, with school and all, but we found our landmarks with ease. I didn't know it at the time, but those landmarks would save my life. Before long, we were at the edge of the property line, staring at the part of the forest which we were never been able to enter before. "Look, they're gone!" Zach exclaimed. Sure enough, the thorn bushes had vanished. It was as if the forest itself wanted us to enter. There was something foreboding about this part of the forest. While the surrounding trees stretched their branches outwards in all directions, the trees in the forest of us grew closely together, the branches reaching inwards into the darkness. I felt a chill run down my spine, and suddenly I didn't want to go in there anymore. Zach must have felt it too, because he shivered for a moment. We flipped on our lights and peered into the darkness. Upon closer inspection, the thorns were still present. They just were cleared to form a path into the woods. Zach knelt down, that puzzled look on his face. "I don't see any tracks, human or animal, going into the forest," Zach said. We concluded that someone, or something, must have cleared the path some time ago. Whatever it had, it didn't look like it was still around, or had been back in quite a long time. I didn't like it. The way the trees were so unnaturally bent made me feel as if the forest were waiting to swallow us whole. As ghastly as that sounded, that wasn't the most disturbing part. What was disturbing was I felt compelled to go into those woods. Zach and I looked at one another before moving on. We walked in between the thick trees, our flashlights providing the only source of light in the otherwise pitch black woods. The night was silent, save for the sound of the leaves made as we walked on top of them. I couldn't help thinking they sounded like bones crunching beneath my feet. Occasionally, the trees would part, allowing the moon's red hue to trickle down them like blood. I was relieved when we at last emerged from the forest into a clearing. The trees opened up to a flat field that'd be at least an acre, maybe more. The ground was barren, spare for a few trees here and there. In the middle was what appeared to be a lake. I'd grabbed my map earlier and pulled it out of my bag. I had our property drawn on it, with the woods circled. There was no body of water anywhere near our property of the map. I handed the map to Zach, trying to shake the feeling off that something was wrong. We couldn't have walked for more than 5 minutes, I said. Zach looked as confused as I was. We tried to locate ourselves on the map, but aside from the lake, there was no defining features at that moment. My gut was telling me to go back, to get the hell out of there. But then Zach started walking towards the lake, so I followed. He reached it before I did and let out a gasp. "Dude, come look at this," he said in almost a whisper. It's not right." Those words would haunt me for the rest of my life. It almost felt as though my legs had a mind of their own, moving on their own accord. Before long, I was standing next to Zach at the edge of the water. It didn't take me long to see what he meant. Our reflections weren't in the water, but everything else was. Only different. A few trees grew along the shoreline, but what was reflecting back was, well, I don't know what to call it. The trees, instead of being barren, were covered in what looked like flesh. It was then that I noticed we weren't the only things not reflected on the water surface. The sky, blood moon, and all were absent. In its place was a seemingly endless black void. "That's so weird," Zach mumbled. Zach's voice freed me from my trance. He walked along the bank until he found what he was looking for. A stick. "I don't think we should be here," I said to Zach. But he just ignored me. It was as if something was making him pick up that stick. Zach approached the surface. I saw the water move as if there was something just beneath the surface. I tried to call out his name, but no sound came out of my mouth. I just stood there, frozen to the spot. As he knelt down, prodding the surface of the water with the stick. He did this a few times, then stood up and looked at me. "It's just water," he said, taking a step forward. It was then he lost his balance and fell backwards into the water, a look of surprise on his face. I was expecting him to break the surface once the splash had subsided, but he never did. At first, I thought he was fooling around, but seconds turned into minutes, and I realized he wasn't breaking me. I ran towards the spot where he'd fallen into the lake. Slowly, as I approached this edge, not wanting to touch the surface, I shone my light into the murky depths, scanning for any sign of my friend. As I was about to give up, I saw it. Zach's flashlight was on, except it was near the entrance into the forest that was reflected in the water. I looked back where we had entered, seeing no flashlight, but when I returned my gaze to the lake, there it was. It never crossed my mind to run back and call the police, and even if it had, well, what would I tell them? That my friend fell into the lake? Was transported to some alternate nightmarish reality? Yeah, right. Like they would believe me. I wouldn't have believed me if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes. I began to shiver uncontrollably. It wasn't that it was particularly cold that night. It was the thought of what I had to do. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and placed it on the ground a few feet from the bank before taking my bag off. I unzipped it and stuck my hand inside the opening and pulled out the spare flashlight. I laid it next to my phone and its beam pouring into the water. I didn't have a signal here, but I could get one near the barn, and I wanted it ready because, well, I had a very unsettling feeling. I slowly approached the water's edge, not knowing what to expect. I inhaled deeply and jumped in, feet first. What I felt next is hard to describe. It was cold, very cold, as if I had jumped into ice water, and I felt as though my insides were being torn inside out. It was like vertigo, but not quite the same. It was as if I had lost all my senses, including direction. When I had emerged from the lake, I took a huge breath of stale, dry air. I climbed out of the water and looked around. I was there, in the nightmarish forest. Up ahead, I could see Zach's flashlight abandoned on the ground next to his backpack. I was about to call out his names when I saw them. The garden shears he brought lay broken in two on the ground, and each blade was coated in thick blood. I picked them up, not wanting to be out here defenseless. The forest was unlike anything I'd ever seen. The trees were covered in tendrils of flesh, wet and pulsing as if alive. The world was dimly lit, but I couldn't tell where it was coming from. I looked up at the sky, but saw only darkness. No moon, no stars, just pitch black darkness. I felt as though if I were to jump, I would be consumed by the darkness, and again the feeling of being swallowed whole rushed over me. As I walked, the forest floor made a mix of a squishy sound followed by a dull thud, as though there was metal beneath the flesh. I followed the path into the woods, heading back towards my house. Here and there were pieces of Zach's clothing stuck to the trees. It looked as if he was running from something. I made it out of the thicker forest back into familiar territory, if you could call it that. All of our landmarks were there, albeit somewhat hard to make out due to the flesh. I was almost to the edge when I heard a blood-curdling scream. It was Zach. I ran fast, faster than I thought I could ever, the foul air burning my lungs as I took short breaths. I slowed as I reached the clear unable to breathe. Part of Zach's pants laid in tatters on the ground, with a large amount of blood leading towards the barn. The barn was a stark contrast to the forest. It was comprised of not wood, but of rusted metal. And though the tendrils climbed at the perimeter, they didn't extend more than maybe 3 feet. I approached the door cautiously, holding a blade in each hand, and pushed them open. What I saw next, I'd never forget. Zach's body was hung on a meat hook, its jagged edge protruding through his right upper chest. His shirt was soaked in blood while trailing down his legs. His pants were shredded, and where his feet used to be were mangled lumps of meat with bits of bone sticking out at odd angles. It looked like something had chewed them off. And I shuddered at the thought of what did this to him. Beneath him was a steadily growing puddle of blood. I would have thought him dead had he not looked up at me. Slowly, he reached his left hand into his pocket and pulled out his phone, holding out to me. As his arm stretched out, his mouth out the words to get out. But all that came out of his mouth was gurgling sound, followed by blood. I put the blades down and took it, then watched as my friend took his last breath. I looked at his phone and saw he had been taking a picture of what attacked him. It was human-like, but distorted. His legs and arms were long and lanky. Skin stretched thin over bones. It had a small tail like what you would see on a tadpole. Its feet and hands both ended in 4 digits, each complete with long, sharp claws. Its spine protruded from its back and looked as if it would tear right through at any moment. It had a neck twice as long as a normal human, with a round head at the end. It was facing downward in the picture, so I could see what its face looked like. I looked up and noticed that Zach wasn't the only one hanging in the barn. There were several bodies, each in various stages of decomposition, hanging from the hook. Some of them were bone picked clean, while others looked as if they had been hanging there for months. At this point, I doubled over and threw up, and when I raised my head, I saw it. The creature. Its face was something straight out of a nightmare. Where its face should have been was a mouth full of razor-sharp teeth sunken into the head. It kind of reminded me of the giant maw of a kraken as it devoured one of the Odysseus ships. On either side were 2 small, beady black eyes. Eyes as dark as the night sky. As I lunged at me, I fell backwards, my thumb hitting the camera button. A bright light flashed from the phone and the creature stumbled backwards, emitting a horrible screeching noise that sounded like a dozen birds going through a meat grinder. I got to my feet and ran, bolting from the barn into the woods. The creature still screeching madly. I heard multiple screech echoes from within the forest as I ran. Just how many of those things were out there? I didn't want to know. My body moved on autopilot, following the markers that Zach and I had followed so many times before. At one point, I saw one of them running at me on all fours from my right side. Instinctively, I took its picture, glad to see it stumbled and fell. I ran into the thickest of the trees that led to the lake, sprinting as quick as I could without falling over. As I made it into the clearing, I fell and felt a searing pain shoot down from my left leg into my foot. One of the creatures had dug its claw into me and was dragging me back into the forest. Zach's phone had fallen a few feet from me, and I couldn't reach it. To my right was his bag, with a spare flashlight sticking out from the top. I grabbed it. I never prayed so hard in my life like I did that night in the woods. Please, God, let it work. Please, God, let it work. I muttered as I pointed it towards the creature and flipped the light on. Immediately, a beam of light shone on it into the creature's face and released me, retreating back into the darkness, howling in pain. I half ran, half limped to the edge of the water, all the while the screeching of the creature could volumes behind me. Reflected in it was my world. Trees without flesh, a sky alight with stars, and a forest devoid of those things. I didn't hesitate. I jumped into the water, not caring about the return of the vertigo feeling. I emerged from the surface and took in a deep breath of air that didn't taste like death. I pulled myself onto the shore and collapsed, panting. I laid there, listening for those creatures to break through the surface. But they never did. I turned off the flashlight on my phone, put them back in my bag, and began limping into the forest. As I made my way through the darkest thickets, I heard the screeching of one of those creatures. I turned around, fumbling with the flashlight, and dropped it, causing the bulb to shatter. I turned around and ran, not noticing the pain in my leg, and not stopping until I had reached the barn. With the adrenaline fading, I collapsed beneath the light above the door. For a second, I could have sworn that I saw one of those things lurking in the woods. I wasted no time. I pulled my phone out from my pocket and called the police, telling them my friend had been murdered. I didn't know how long I sat there. It felt like an eternity. I was beyond happy to hear the sirens as they approached. I don't remember much else of that night. I know my parents were there, pale as a ghost when they saw my leg as I sat in the ambulance. I saw Zach's parents there as well. His mother was on her knees, face buried in her hands, crying. His father stood there, one arm on his crying wife, his face devoid of any emotion. At that point, it all became a blur. I awoke the next morning in the hospital. My parents asleep in the bed next to mine. Apparently, I had lost a lot of blood from my wounds. and passed out. I remember feeling uneasy at the thought of having someone else's blood inside of me. The police questioned me and I told them everything. I told them about the forest, the lake, the nightmarish world, and the creatures. I even told them how to find it. They didn't believe me, of course, and I had left Zach's phone back by the lake. They summarized that Zach and I were attacked by some animal, and after seeing it mauled my friend to death, my mind, influenced by Halloween movies, created a world to cope with the trauma. Nonetheless, the police formed a search party and went into the woods, searching for what remains of Zach's body. They never did find it, nor did they find the patch of woods that led to the lake. It was as if that part of the forest simply disappeared. I had to take physical therapy as well as to talk to a shrink regularly. My leg recovered. I, I never stopped having nightmares from that night, even though it's been years since it happened. My parents didn't stay in that town long after that. I was glad. I hated the look the other kids at the school would give me, or how they would keep asking what really happened out there in the woods. Now, whenever my parents have work, they make sure to rent a house in town, far from any nearby woods. Sometimes, though, late at night, I can hear that creature in the distant woods, screeching in a mix of anger and hunger. Hunger for me. Wow. Okay. Um, shit. Okay. Um, First off, hello again. It's me, Amontis. It's a pleasure to see you guys again, and I hope you guys are having a great Halloween. I want to quickly say I wasn't expecting the story to be this long, and I'm not upset either, first off, because the story is really fucking well written. And the reason why I was very like surprised with how long it was telling me it was like 13 to 17 minutes long, but as you see by the length of this, it is not. But it's that's genuinely really fucking good. Holy shit. For a short story that I love the detail. I love like every little fucking detail that they give, like how they describe like the way they feel and everything. And they still give you just enough where it's not like, oh, they're completely telling you everything. They give you enough detail to leave to your imagination. And I'm gonna make a weird like Hail Mary is the way to say it, is with the way they kind of like describe it. It seems like the creatures are just enough sentient to understand that meat is better preserved at like a longer rate or in a better quality, which to me is cool as shit. And with him like making the comment that he thinks he still hears it ever so often is such a cool fucking thing because it insinuates in a way that it's not like, oh, it's just this forest. It's, oh, these things, whatever they are going from forest to forest to forest to forest. Like the lake is going to different places. which raises a question to me is because the way it was like described was like it seemed like the barn was as if their head location. And if so, does that mean the barn moves location or is it just the lake? You know? That's so fucking cool. I just love that. It like I know you can say it's a basic idea, but even with like basic ideas, if you can hear me, I'm doing fucking quotations. Um, but as like I was saying, putting in quotations like a basic idea, it's not. This is such a cool fucking idea of like a monster and like a nightmarish world, and like this is like a pretty recent story. Yeah, it came out not even 4 days ago, and it's just so good. I like the way it is. But yeah, I want to as I said, I wanted to say Happy Halloween because when I upload this, it's mostly gonna be Halloween Day. But this is so fucking cool. I love this. Like, and it gives you a reason for it all too. Is why they're traveling, and like I know they're yeah, it's so good. But this story is great, and I think it deserves a lot of love because even though it's just 4 days old, it's well written. The person that wrote this, which his name is Shawn Badolian, however you say the last name, I am sorry for fucking butchering that. Great writer. Might have to look at more of his stuff, like see exactly what excels he makes. Which, as I check real quick, he only has one story, which is that one, which is not bad at all. It's amazing for if what I'm guessing is a first time writer coming for someone who does not, you know, upload writings. Is that is amazing. Hold on, as I'm looking up this person. Well, I want to say thank you guys again, and I hope you guys all have an amazing Halloween because it's the spooky season after all. And I'm most excited to cut this down so you don't hear all my rambling. The name. Let me specify the name of this one, which I probably already put in the beginning, but I would want you to all give it a read. The Lake in the Woods. You might notice that each video is going to be a little different from each other. The reason why is because I'm still trying to figure out what I like to do. But thank you guys again. Have a great Halloween, and I all hope you guys get scared this Halloween. All right. Good morning, good afternoon, and good night.